This week's parasha, Parashat Mattot, at the very end of the parasha, we have the story of the Bnei Gad and the Bnei Reuven. Two tribes come up to Moshe Rabbeinu. Mikneh Rav haya Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad. Atzum me'od. The children of Reuven, the tribe of Reuven, the children of Gad, they had so much cattle. Mikneh Rav. They had so much cattle, so many animals. You know, the Jewish people just conquered these wars against Sichon, against the Amorim, against Ammon, and then now against Moab and Midian. And we conquered all this land to the east of the Jordan, and they looked around and they saw the area that they have is a makom mikneh. It's a good place for cattle. So it says, Vayavo Bnei Gad Bnei Reuven, the tribes of Gad and Reuven, they came before Moshe Rabbeinu and before Elazar Kohen and before all of the Nesi'im, and they said to them, you know, if we found favor in your eyes, can you tell us, can you give us this land over here, and can we settle on the eastern side of the Jordan? So now, on the first hashkafa, the first look at this is like not a good thing, because we're supposed to go to Israel proper. That's where all the blessings are, and there's even a midrash that's going to go on and it's going to say that they're going to be the first tribes to be exiled. That's going to be Reuven, Gad, and the half of the tribe of Menashe that Moshe is going to add to them. They're going to be the first ones to go to exile because they never went to the land of Israel, and there's a certain level in the midrashim that are a little bit harsh against them, kind of like, oh, they have this desire for their cattle, for their money. Like if this is a part of their intentions, part of their kavanah, it's not 100% good. Now Moshe Rabbeinu gets angry at them, and Moshe Rabbeinu starts to give them major musar, and he's like, what are you going to do? Like, did you not remember what happened 40 years earlier, 38 years earlier with the spies? You know, like, you're going to just settle here and let the rest of your brothers fight the war? Like, and he gives them this major musar. To which they respond, and they says, no, that's not what we meant at all. We're definitely going to go and fight those wars, and then eventually we'll come back and we're going to settle the land. And that's exactly what happens when we enter the land of Israel. They come and they join with their brothers and they fight the wars. And only at the end of Yeshua's times, when they really conquered the majority of Israel, then were they allowed to go back, and they went back to their family. So really, we see their intention was they really saw that they had all this cattle, and they really said this was the right proper thing, and they really felt. And we actually spoke in previous years about like what was their kavanah, with what did they think? Why did they think what they were doing is the correct move? Seeing how much cattle they had on the pshat level, and what they were thinking of, and ultimately Moshe agrees to it and says, okay, fine. So meaning that even though there is a negative midrash that they're going to be the first ones to go into exile, but that's really going to happen hundreds of years later, and they are going to have a pretty good life over there with all of their cattle. And we see that Hashem accepts it, and there even are opinions that when Moshe starts doing the goralot of who gets what part, so the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, their goral, their lot, according to some opinions, actually already comes out on the eastern side of the Jordan, meaning they might have been right. So the question is this only after they came up with this request? Was it always going to be this way, and they had just figured it out? But there seems to be that, on the pshat level, there was something to what they were trying to say. They didn't notice the gifts that Hashem gave them and wanted to use it in what they thought would be the proper way of using it. And we do see a little bit of critique of Hazal. But I saw in the Shvilei Pinchas a total other approach to what was their kavanah. Meaning, because he notices, that Moshe gives them this whole musar, and they're quiet, and then ultimately, when they say that we're going to fight and we're really going to be there, Moshe accepts. So if Moshe accepts, there is a certain level that it was okay, and God accepts it. There is a certain level that it was okay with what they were saying, but maybe there were some deeper arguments they were actually thinking of, and based on a future Rashi, he comes up with another idea, which I thought was a pretty cool, different way of looking at the whole story. So if we fast forward to Parashat Vezot Beracha, the very end of the Torah, we have Moshe Rabbeinu blessing all of the tribes, giving them their final blessings before he dies. And when he gets to the tribe of Gad, he tells God the following thing. First, he blesses Gad, and then he says to him, Vayar Reshit Lo. He says, this is the tribe who he chose the first portion for himself. He saw and he picked the part of the land that he wanted first, say the commentators. Why? And why did he pick his land first? Meaning it's referring back to our parasha, say the commentators. Kisham Chelkat Mechokek Safun. Because in that part, Kisham, in that area, is the chelek of the Mechokek. The Mechokek, the lawgiver, is Safun, is hidden over there, which Rashi explains, because in his territory, that's going to be where Moshe Rabbeinu, the lawgiver, the Mechokek, that's where Moshe Rabbeinu is going to be buried. So explains the Shvilei Pinchas, and I saw this brought down in many other Sfarim as well. The Hasidic Sephers really go to town with this, that Bnei Gad wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to be buried in his territory. I mean, there's this idea they didn't want to leave Moshe Rabbeinu. So now when Moshe is blessing him at the end of his life, he's kind of realizing, maybe that's really what was going on. You wanted, God ultimately said, I can't enter the land of Israel. I'm going to be buried on the east side of the Jordan. You wanted to be with me on the east side of the Jordan. And the Shvilei Pinchas says it's not only Bnei Gad, it's Bnei Reuven. They both wanted to be with Moshe Rabbeinu. So he explains, okay, but so then why is Bnei Gad the one that actually merits to have Moshe Rabbeinu's land and not the Bnei Reuven? So he quotes the Ramban by us, where the Ramban explains that while both Reuven and Gad had a lot of cattle, they did mikneh Rav, and we're going to see Reuven's name is always mentioned first when I just talked about the bigger picture, but when it comes to actual speaking to Moshe, it says Bnei Gad Bnei Reuven came to him. So God is mentioned before Reuven when they're speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu, because they were the ones that initially said to Moshe Rabbeinu, we want to do this. Or he says the Bnei Gad are the stronger ones, they're the Giborim, they're willing to fight. The east bank of the Jordan is a little bit more of the Wild West, so they're willing to be the Giborim to stay on that side. It's only going to be 2.5 tribes, as opposed to the other 10 on the other side of the Jordan. They're willing to do that, but because Bnei Gad is initiating it, they're the first ones to really want to do it. So therefore, the story is always called Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, and not Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad when we speak of the actual story. In the Psukim, he says, if you look closely, when it's referring to them speaking to Moshe, God is first. When it's speaking about the bigger picture, then Reuven is going to be first because Reuven is the Bachor, and he'll get the kavod as the firstborn. But in the actual conversation over the decision who wants to be in this part, Bnei Gad comes first. Okay. Explains the Shvilei Pinchas. Now he's quoting the Sfat Emet, who quotes the Chidush Sharim, quoting Vav Simcha Bunim Mipeshischa. He says, beautiful idea. He says, if you look at the word mikneh Rav, which we translated on the simple meaning, it means they had a lot of cattle. Mikneh means a lot of cattle. Rav, a lot. But on the Midrashic level, and the Hasidim love this board, on the Midrashic level, mikneh Rav comes from the language of a kinyan in their Rav. Meaning, they loved their rabbi so much. They loved Moshe Rabbeinu. He was their Rav. Rabbeinu, he's their Rav. They had a mikneh, they had a kinyan in him. They were so connected to Moshe Rabbeinu, they didn't want to leave him. So the question is, why is it Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven? What is special about them? And why is half of Menashe going to join them as well? What is their special connection to Moshe Rabbeinu? But here's before we get to that, just the idea is, they really want to be with Moshe so much that they're not going to cross over to the Jordan. And that was the original argument to Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's why ultimately when Moshe gives them Musar, he sees that they were really being legitimate. They really are willing to fight. So he realizes something much deeper is going on. And at the end of his life, he's going to have the Ruach HaKodesh to recognize, oh, you know what it was? It's that they wanted me to be with them and they didn't want to leave me. Now, there's an interesting Gemara in Sotah Yud Gimel Amud Bet. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda explains that based on this pasuk that we said that in Moshe's blessing to God, he says that over there in your portion, I'm going to be buried. He's hinting to in the Midrash, and as Rashi explains. So says the Gemara. He says, says Rabbi Yehuda in the Gemara, if it wasn't for the Torah telling us, if it wasn't for Moshe telling us, we would never actually have realized this, because he says, Heichan Moshe met, where did Moshe actually die? Bechel Kol Shel Reuven. He actually died in the territory of Reuven, because it says that he went from Vayal Moshe Ma'arvot Moab El Har Nevo, and he's ultimately going to die in Har Nevo. So says Rabbi Yehuda in the Gemara, where's Har Nevo? Venevo Bechel Kol Shel Reuven Kaima. He says, and Har Nevo, based on the Pesukim in Bamidbar, is in the section of Reuven. He says, Vehechan Moshe Kavur, and where is Moshe buried? Bechel Kol Shel Gad. How do we know Bechel Shel Gad? From the pasuk of the Beracha, from the blessing that we said what? In his territory, that's where the Mechokek, that's where the lawgiver, that's where Moshe is going to be buried. So we see over here that he dies by Reuven, but he's going to be buried in the area of God. How did that happen? So he says, beautiful Gemara, he says that Moshe Rabbeinu, after he died in Reuven and Har Nevo, but then he was moved and buried in the section of God. And how did that happen? He says, first off, how far is that? He says, it's Arba'a Milin, it's 4 milin away, whatever that distance is. And he says, how did he get there? Melamed shaya Moshe mutal bekanfei Shechina. The kanfei Shechina, God's holy presence, the wings of the Shechina brought him to the place of his burial in God. So we see that he dies in Reuven, but he's moved over and actually buried in the area of God. So ask the Shvilei Pinchas, why? Why is this happening? Like, what's going on over here? So he says, why is it in both places? So on the first level, why both places? Because while Bnei Gad is the initiator, he's the one that's coming to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he's saying, we really want to be buried. He's hinting to him, we really want to be with you. We don't want to leave you. So he's going to merit to have Moshe Rabbeinu buried there. But Reuven is joining as well. Reuven also wants to be with Moshe, so he's going to have the zechut of Moshe dying in his territory. So they both really want to be close to Moshe. So Reuven gets the zechut of Moshe dying in Har Nevo, But then God gets the zechut of him being buried in God because he's the one that initiated and he's the main guy speaking over here. So ultimately, the holy place of Moshe Rabbeinu's burial will be in the area of God. But the question is now, why? What was so special? What's the connection between the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven as well as Moshe Rabbeinu? Maybe we'll even understand what do we have to do with what does it have to do with Menashe, because you see half of Menashe is going to join as well. Okay, so says the Shvilei Pinchas, he quotes the Homat Anach, he quotes the Haidah back on Parshat Bamidbar, in the very beginning of the Sefer Bamidbar. It speaks about the Degalim. It speaks about the different how the different tribes were all set up. So the Haidah there quotes the Imrei Noam, who says as follows. He says, how come Moshe Rabbeinu is buried in the area of Gad? So he says as follows. He says, first off, he says, Gad, Gimel Dalet is Gematria Zayin. Moshe Rabbeinu was born in Zayin Adar. So when Vatomer Leah Bagad, when Leah is naming God, and he's saying, oh, Bagad, oh, God, that's when Moshe Rabbeinu was born. So we already see a little bit of connection already in the numbers. Okay, Chatz Chasidic idea, but continues the Imrei Noam quoted in the Haidah. So he says, the zechut of God that Moshe is buried by him is because he didn't fight against the tribe of Dan. Okay, what is he talking about? God didn't fight with Dan. Why? Klomar, he says, B'sha'ah shamar Moshe, Dan yerosh degel. When Moshe Rabbeinu was dividing up the Jewish people based on their flags, when Moshe said Dan is going to be the head of his own section, remember we said that the tribes are surrounded the Mishkan, 3 tribes on each side, and each side has a leader of a tribe. So we know we have Yehuda on one side, we have Reuven on a different side, we have Ephraim on the third side, and then we're going to have ourselves Dan by the fourth side. So when Moshe picked Dan to be the head of the fourth section, Vaya Gad Yachol Omar, and God could have said, Ani Zilpa, Vedan Bechor Bilha. He says, God could have said, I don't understand. Why does Dan get to be the head of a tribe and not me? Because, I'm the firstborn of Zilpa. Dan is the firstborn of Bilha. Why am I not a Rosh Vadega? What makes him so special? Because if you look at the different tribes, we have Yehuda, that's like the Melech. He's the first one going. Then we have Reuven, he's one of the Bechors. We have Ephraim, who's leading up the Yosef side over there. And then he's saying to himself, okay, so then Dan gets it. But what do you mean, what about Dan? What about me? Or actually, if you look at it from a different perspective, in theory, every one of the imahot every one of the 4 mothers should have had a section in the Degalim. There should have been, like, for example, Leah should have had one, like with Yehuda the king, and then Rachel should have one with Ephraim, and then Bilhah should have one with Dan, and then Zilpah should have one with Gad. But that's not what happens, because we see instead of Zilpah having it through God, we have ourselves, Leah has 2. She has Yehuda and Reuven. So that's not fair. So he could have said, Lamani any Rosh Degel Kamo. Why am I not equal to Dan? He's the Ben of Shfachot. I'm the Ben of the Shfachot. I should have one too. So he could have asked that, but he didn't. And rather he was quiet. And Moshe then tells him, "Have a zenav la'arayot v'al rosh la'shualim." It's better to be the tail of the lions than to be the head of the oxen, which kind of means over here that better for you to be God ultimately is going to be with the section of Reuven. So go be with the Leah's kids and don't be the head of your own section. Meaning, I guess there is still a different layer between the Shfachot children and Leah and Rahel. So it's better to go be the lower one with the house of Leah with Reuven in the back. So therefore, says the Imrei Noam, that if you look at the name of the head of the tribe, his name was Eliasaph ben Deuel. The head of God was Eliasaph ben Deuel. That's what he's called in the first place, in the beginning of Bamidbar. But then in Perek Bet, when we speak about the Degalim, his name is Eliasaph ben Reuel. It went from Deuel, which kind of means like he understands the dot of God, to Reuel, which comes from the language of Reu, like a Re'eh, like a V'ahavta l'reach kamocha, like the beloved friend of God, Reuel. So he says, who is Reuel? The Reuel is the Re'ah of the El, the friend of Hashem. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. So meaning, he went from Eliasaph ben Deuel to Eliasaph ben Reuel. The name gets changed to hint to you that he has a connection to Moshe Rabbeinu. God, the head of God, the tribe of God, is Reuel. He's connected to Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the Re'ah of the El, who's connected to God. And that would be the change of the name, because God, we see over here, by humbling himself. Now, by humbling himself, that actually makes a lot of sense, because what do we know about Moshe Rabbeinu? We spoke about the last couple of weeks. Moshe is the Anav. He's the most humble of all the humbles. And what's Moshe telling Bnei Gad? Humble yourself. Don't fight with Dan. Go join the back of Reuven. Go to the kids of Leah. Don't be in charge of your own. Be the tail to the lions. So therefore, if they're acting like Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe is the Anav, and now they're acting like Anavim. They're not fighting back, and they're accepting it. Wow, that is the connection they have to Moshe Rabbeinu. They're going to be merit because they're so humble. They're going to merit to have the most humble person ever be buried in his territory. So that explains why God is on this side. Now, what about Reuven? Reuven also has this connection to Moshe. Also wants to be close. They also have the mikneh Rav. They love their rabbi, and they're going to merit to have Moshe die in their territory. They're not as strong as God, but maybe a little bit, but they are still pretty close. So what's Reuven's connection? So here he explains, says beautifully the Shvilei Pinchas, he says, Reuven, what do we know Reuven? Reuven actually was born to be the Bechor. But we know he's going to mess up over there with Bilha's bed, whatever takes place over there. But Reuven messed up, loses the Bechorah. So what would we think? We would think, oh, he loses the Bechorah, so now he's going to be angry at everybody, hate each other. No, we don't see that. We see that Reuven goes out of his way. Who's going to get the Bechorah instead of Reuven? Yosef. Yosef is going to get the double portion of Ephraim and Menashe. So when Yosef is going to be Zochet to become the new Bechor, so, Reuven should be so upset at him. But we don't see that. Actually, the exact opposite. We see Reuven trying to save Yosef's life. He's the one that when he says, don't kill Yosef, throw him in the pit. And his whole kavanah was to go save Yosef later on. And he actually quotes, it's a beautiful Rashi. When Reuven is born, so it says over there, but Leah gives birth, Vateled Bemetikra Shemo Reuven. What does Reuven mean? So it says Rashi, Rabbeinu Pirshu, according to the Gemara, Amar Reuven, see what's Bain, see what the differences is. Reu ma Bain ban Bnei, see what's the difference between my son Reuven leben Hami, to my father-in-law's son, meaning i.e. Esav. Look at how different my son Reuven, my Bechor, is to the other Bechor Esav. Why? Shemachar ha-Bechorah le-Yaakov, because Esav sold his birthright to Yaakov and then tries to kill him. V'zeh Lo machar Yosef, and my son Reuven, he never even sold it to Yosef, but he lost it. V'lo yirer alav, meaning he wasn't even a clear sale. I mean, Esav legally sells it to Yaakov and gets angry. Reuven loses it, doesn't even sell, but he loses it to Yosef. And not only does he not fight against him, he tries to save his life. He tries to go save him from the boar. So look at Reuven humbling himself for Yosef and losing the Bechorah, not fighting back. Also, Reuven, just like God, has that level of humbling himself, of humility, and that's going to connect himself to Moshe Rabbeinu as well, so he's going to merit it as well. Now, what about Menashe? What's the story with Menashe? So Menashe, we see over here, it seems to be the Mefarshim bring down that Moshe Rabbeinu sent half of Menashe to join up with these two tribes. Now, why did he send them? So different reasons are brought down. One is that this way there'll be a connection with the people in the mainland, because Menashe comes from Yosef, who has this deep love of the land of Israel, and we see from the Benot Tzlofchad, and we're going to see with the cousins of Tzlofchad in next week's parasha, we see they just have this deep love for the land of Israel, and that's going to be a good connection for those that are on the east side to want to always be connected to the west side. There's other ideas of Kochot, of Bnei and Haraz of Yosef, but a lot of different reasons why Menashe is sent over there. But ask the Shvilei Pinchas, but why was Menashe chosen? Ephraim should be chosen. What's Ephraim and Menashe? What's really going on over here? So what do we know about Ephraim and Menashe? We know that we bless our children to be like Ephraim and Menashe. Simech Elohim ke Ephraim echim Menashe. But what was the order of birth? Who's the Bechor? The actual Bechor is not Ephraim. The actual Bechor is Menashe. Menashe was the one that was born first. But ultimately, Ephraim had greater kochot. Mashiach ben Yosef is daf going to come from Ephraim. That's where Yeshua is going to come from. Mashiach ben Yosef is going to come from there. There was a certain level of kedusha and holiness and greatness of Ephraim that was greater than Menashe. But did Menashe fight back? Or was Ephraim all haughty about it? No, actually, one of the reasons we gave in previous years, why do we bless our kids to be like Ephraim and Menashe? Why is that the bracha? Because they're the brothers that finally got along. They're the brothers that aren't jealous of each other. So here we have ourselves Menashe, the older one, who's humbling himself for the younger brother and letting the younger brother be the one to be the primary son. Ephraim is going to lead the degel of his side. Mashiach ben Yosef, Yoshua, the whole thing. Ephraim is the main one, but Menashe is the humble one. So if Menashe is the humble one, so he's now going to be the third one to join up this group. We're going to have ourselves Gad, who humbles himself, doesn't fight against Dan, accepts his place as not ahead of a tribe, not ahead of a degel, as not ahead of a section of the machaneh, and rather stays in the back of Leah's kids with Reuven. We have ourselves Reuven, who's going to humble himself for Yosef, who's going to take over the Bechor rights, and we have Menashe, who's going to humble himself for his younger brother Ephraim, and let him be the Bechor. So if all three of these tribes are so humble, that's the zechut that Moshe Rabbeinu, the Anav of all the Anavim, is going to be buried in their land because they had the mikneh Rav. They loved Moshe Rabbeinu. They wanted it so much. Shabbat Shalom.